Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this panel for the 32nd New Orleans Film Festival Filmmaker Conference. It's called Love on Screen, Creating Trust in Chemistry in Fiction. And my name is Zandashé Brown. I'm the Artist Engagement and Programming Manager for the New Orleans Film Society and a Louisiana born and bred filmmaker. And I have the honor of moderating this conversation between two filmmakers who are sharing their work within our New Orleans Film Festival lineup this year. If you haven't seen the films just yet, I highly recommend you do after the discussion. I'm joined by Mandy Marcus, director of the short film Cousins, and Martin Edralin, who directed the feature film Islands. And both films have their own way of looking at and creating intimacy on screen through friends and family, through lovers, through more, or even intimacy with self. So this conversation is going to go into how they were able to achieve those performances and create intimate spaces on set. And I'm really excited. So let's get into it. First, I'd love to just have you both introduce yourselves and set the context by telling me a little bit about your films and what was the seed of it. What was the initial inspiration or idea that led you to tell the story? And Mandy, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Sure. So my name's Mandy Marcus. I'm a filmmaker based in Brooklyn. And Cousins is a slice of life story about a Caribbean American teenager who reunites with her best friend and cousin from Guyana for a day out in New York City before the funeral of a relative. And so the film follows them from their very first excursion out into the city all the way to the final day of the wake at the end of the night. And so the inspiration for the film is kind of twofold. On one end, I wanted to kind of explore those mundane moments between childhood and adulthood that kind of constitute the coming of age, those small moments that make you think about life differently and think more complexly about emotions, about life, love, shame, loneliness, things like that. So I zoned in on some particular moments from my own life and from the life of my cousins and things like that I wanted to focus on in the film. And then the other part was I just wanted to depict Caribbean American life on screen because that's just my experience, and I had never really seen it shown from this perspective in a film. So it was just something I wanted to do before I left film school.
That's incredible. Thank you so much.
No.
And Martin, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, it's the film. My film is weirdly similar in many ways, which I did not realize. But so my film explores loneliness through a character who's middle-aged, and he's, in Filipino culture, and I know many other cultures, we have a responsibility to take care of our parents. I mean, that changes when you grow up in North America. I'm in Canada, I'm in Toronto. And so it explores someone who's in his 50s or turning 50, and he's kind of the son in the family that never got married. And as his parents got older, he's kind of the one that takes on the duty of staying with them. And, also traditionally, you don't really leave the home until you're married. And so he's sort of stuck in this situation where he's looking after them. He's like a timid character, and so he's never really had the opportunity to date. They're also an immigrant family, and I guess I saw him as someone that never found his place in a foreign culture to him. And his mother dies, and he has to take care of his father and really learn to take care of himself too. And then we have a character, his cousin, who comes from abroad for the funeral of his mother. And she sort of breathes new life into the house, and she kind of replaces the mother in the home. And I was trying to create an opportunity for the character as a shy person to sort of open up to someone where he wouldn't feel so anxious or vulnerable with someone he didn't know. But this is a cousin who, they might have known each other as kids, and they're reuniting, but he slowly takes steps to sort of open up and experience you know, these sort of romantic feelings that he's never really experienced before.
Such a beautiful film, and I'm excited to dive into all the, similarities between both of your films a little bit later in this conversation, because I think there is a lot there about loneliness and longing and community that's really, really interesting to me. But first, I want to ask about the actors in each of your films and how your collaboration with them started. Did any of them know one another, or did the chemistry that they had on screen with their fellow castmates who played their family members, did that have to be built from the ground up? Martin, did you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. None of them knew each other.
Wow.
Yeah, but the first two leads we found, they're in Winnipeg, which is like the middle of Canada, and they both happen to be from that city. And we, you know, for casting, we started with self-tapes, and then we eventually did like Skype auditions. And then at some point we decided, since they're in the same city, we kind of did a chemistry audition, and we had them meet somewhere and go through a few scenes together. Um, and I think, I mean, once we decided to cast them, they just really, I think it was more Sheila, who plays Marisol, the female lead. I think she just really wanted to do a good job. And so they would kind of have their own conversations and do their own sort of rehearsals. Um, Roger, or Rogelio, who plays Joshua, he's kind of a mystery. And at points, like, we didn't know if he was taking this movie seriously. But like when he was on set, and I flew out there to do one rehearsal with them, and he was amazing. He must have been doing his own sort of preparation. But yeah, I think they kind of took it upon themselves to figure it out, because they had never really acted before, and I think they just didn't want to show up on set and mess up the movie. But yeah, they were great.
Yeah, that's one of those tough things to contend with, that actors have, and are entitled to their privacy, to their process, but you don't know what's going on in their heads until the day sometimes. But they both pulled it off so beautifully. So beautiful.
Yeah, they did. Thank you.
And Mandy, did your cast know each other at all, or was that also from ground up?
All from the ground up. So going into auditions, I knew that I wanted, for the leads, girls with like a Caribbean American, or like a Caribbean background, at least like first or second generation, just like some sort of connection to like the Caribbean. Or like at one point, like I was like, I would cast someone who's like from the Caribbean and like not American at all, for like the cousin as well, that comes from Guyana. But we ended up going with an actress who's American but does amazing accents, and she was able to get the accent perfectly. But in the audition process, I did group auditions like initially, because instead of like self tapes and stuff, because I was auditioning both non-actors and professional actors, and they were mostly teenagers. And just from like research and talking to acting coaches, the advice I got was to kind of like mix them all up together and have them do some like group activities to kind of break the ice before you get into reading sides and stuff like that. So in those initial group activities, which we did some like dancing stuff and some improv and just lots of fun group activities that I led, I had a PA shoot the auditions, and I could see the chemistry between the two actors we eventually went with, Victoria Alcala and Michaela Ewan. And so from that initial like video, I then brought them back to just talk to them about like their background and what they thought of the characters. And I had them play like improv around some of the scenes. And then when we went into actual rehearsals, a lot of the initial rehearsals were just like hanging out, talking about stuff. I would like buy them pizza and like leave the room so they could talk. Like, just like had to be really, like I tried to be really cautious, because they, one of them was just brand new to acting. Victoria, she'd only been acting for about a year, and she was 16 at the time. And Michaela was a student at NYU Tisch, so she had a little more experience. But definitely they're kind of like just getting to know each other before we got into actually like rehearsing the lines and stuff like that was like a big part of building that chemistry that they have on screen.
And was there anything in particular that either of you were looking for when you tested for chemistry between actors, like any small exchanges or just, aside from general comfort for each other, like for these specific roles, was there something that you were hoping to find and did with your cast?
I think one of the things that I really wanted was for both of the girls to be good dancers and to be like very free when they dance, and just like to like have that like be reflected like on screen. So that recording the dance auditions was like a big part of it, and just seeing it. But then we also had them kind of like just improv dances together, and that ended up being a part of the movie as well. And I think it's like one of my favorite parts of the movie, just like seeing that sort of like two people who haven't seen each other forever, but just like connect in this very physical way. And that being like representative of their relationship was super important. And I'm glad that we spent so much time on that in casting, because it's like my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, it works. It plays out really well. And Martin, were there like seeds that you were looking for too between actors?
Um, I think I just wanted to make sure that they got along, like that there was chemistry in their performances, but also just as people that, as non-professional actors, I just wanted them to feel comfortable and like working with each other, because we were going to have to try to figure out a lot. Like I didn't know how difficult it would be, because you never know with non-professional actors. I mean, I guess you never really know even with professional actors. But one of the things we found that was really funny was like, even just with the chemistry reading we did over Skype, was Sheila would sort of lead the way, and then she would always be like kind of giving him instructions, which kind of was the dynamic of the characters. And even as we went on with production, like it was always sort of like that, and we were like, this is interesting, because this is how they are in real life. The one thing that I have to say that I was really worried about was like, there's masturbation in the movie, and I didn't want it to be like, a gross man masturbating, or like, I didn't want it to be sad. And he was sort of this perfect balance of just showing someone that does the act, and we just get, it's just something that guys do. And, it's not something we see on screen unless we're seeing like a sad, pathetic teenager or sad old man. It's never portrayed like we see women. And I also didn't want it to be like hypersexual either.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what I was looking for, but he sort of nailed the sweet spot of, it being like an acceptable thing to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially for scenes like that, you want to have a certain amount of like trust between director and actors, that they feel comfortable in that environment, and that they're just that they feel comfortable of what they're being asked to do. Which brings me to the next question I had. How did you as directors build relationships with your actors that allowed them that freedom and safety that they needed for these performances after they had the opportunity, or as they had the opportunity to bond with one another? What did it look like for you to bond with them? And Mandy, you've started to talk about that with just like talking about the time that you spent with the girls, buying them pizza and things like that. How did you continue that when you were on set, and continue to just make sure that they had a space to freely, explore these characters?
Yeah, so I think kind of the most important thing for me was bringing in my cinematographer pretty early into the process. And she's her name's Ricky Porter, and she looks very young, like she looks like she could be a teenager, so that kind of helped too. But they like knew her very well, and she filmed some of the early rehearsals just on her iPhone before we got to like camera test stuff, just to like get them used to being around the two of us, so we could always kind of retreat back into that bubble when things got really crazy on set. And when we had like a ton of people running around and everyone's yelling, it could be just like me cinematographer Ricky and the two actresses, or also Shafi, who played the like young man. He was also like in that bubble with us.
That's great. Yeah, I've heard that technique before, to just like expose them to what's on set pretty early on, just to fall into the flow of it.
Yeah, we were using like a huge camera too that I had like none of them had worked with before, so I didn't want them to be like get to set and be like, oh my god, it's like a real camera.
Yeah, they're real lights, real camera.
Yeah.
And Martin, for you, what was that like? Just building relationship with your actors and creating trust.
Yeah, I didn't really have to do all the things Mandy did, and I think a part of it was because they were in the same city, and so they did their own sort of rehearsals, and we did do like a reading once on Zoom with like some of the other cast here, and then they met up to do that together. And so I think by the time they came to Toronto to film, they knew each other more than I knew them.
Hmm.
And also when we brought them, we were like, okay, we'll get you guys each a place, but they had decided they wanted to stay together, and we're like, are you sure? Like they're both married, and not that I think anything would happen, but like maybe your spouses wouldn't like that, but they sort of insisted, and I think that they wanted to just keep rehearsing and maybe just lean on each other after the shoot and talk about things. So I think they fortunately did it on their own, and for us it was just, for me and the other producer, it was just a matter of constantly checking in, asking what they're comfortable with, and yeah, and it went pretty smoothly. There's also like not a ton of like very intimate scenes, or there really aren't any very intimate scenes. Like they're not making out. There was no sex scenes, so they never really had to go too far together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a really great situation to be in when your actors have that relationship and you get to just step in and you communicate something to them, but they have the context for everything that they're bringing to that performance before you show up. So that's incredible, especially for non-actors to be able to take that sort of initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm also really interested in just the way that loneliness and desire are depicted in both of these films, that are also both, so intimate. And this is kind of a question coming out of nowhere that just came out the top of my head. But I'm curious, what is it about what is it about loneliness and yearning that um, have to come with a film about intimacy and relationships? Like, how did those things go hand in hand for you in making these works?
Martin, you want to
Okay.
go?
Sure. I mean, and are you talking about inspiration or?
Yeah. I mean, just to that, because okay, for instance, in your film, Martin, I mean, I think we see the loneliness that we see through your protagonist. It makes it that much more rewarding whenever we see him encounter, and find companionship. Were those things always there for you in the script, or did one sort of lead to the other? Just, yeah, how did that inspiration come together?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started developing this, I think, in like 2015, and the the concept took many different shapes. And this is going back to, I had a short film, Whole, that was also at your festival, that also dealt with loneliness and desire. And I think it was just something that was always on my mind. And I find now I'm 5 years into like an amazing relationship, but can still sort of feel that, or just feel like, even my partner, we're so open, but I still feel like there are things about me that she or nobody will understand as much as they try. Or
Yeah.
and so I think that's sort of what I brought to this story. And then also thinking about people I know in my family, or friends of friends that are like older, and either are single or just single and never even had a romantic experience. And I was really curious about what that's like, you know, like love is one of the greatest experiences in life, and to not have that, I was wondering, like, what is that like? Can you be content? Do you live with regret? And then in this film, it's like, what happens when you give someone the opportunity to experience something like that? And then with this relationship with the cousin, I think that came about because I was also thinking about, you know, we get in these things sometimes where you might have romantic feelings for somebody that you would never act on. Like you can even be in a great relationship or happy being single, but then there's someone that you would have feelings for that you don't even want to, you know, like it could be a friend, it could be like your best friend or, you know, your friend's partner or something, but you just feel this sort of vibe. And then in this situation, I was thinking like, so they can't because they're cousins, and that would be weird, maybe to some cultures anyway. But they're also both single and they haven't even really grown up with each other. So is it that wrong? I don't know.
I definitely found myself while I was watching the movie, I found myself trying to like justify it or, you know, or, or hoping that you would do something cheesy in the plot that would justify it. Like there would be a twist and it would be, oh, it turns out they're not really cousins.
Yeah.
Or something like that, because I wanted that for him so desperately. I mean, it's something that so many people can relate to. Even people who are coupled or partnered or, you know, belong to really expansive communities. I think just isolation and loneliness, and I hate to bring everything back to the pandemic, but it's hard not to. I think those are really prominent themes to contend with when we've been forced to spend so much time with ourselves, with our households in particular. And yeah, I mean, it was a really beautiful evolution to watch through your character.
Thank you.
Mandy, what was that inspiration for you? I mean, what just the title of your film alone had me really excited, and just even the opening scene reminded me of all the time that I spent with cousins growing up, which in my imagination there was like 50 of us, but I think it was only like 2 or 3 cousins. But when you come from, you know, communities with really big families, your cousins tend to be your first friends, and it's such a special relationship that you capture so perfectly. So I'd love to hear more about, you know, what inspired that exploration for you.
Sure. But first I'll just quickly chime in on the loneliness one too.
Yeah,
Because Martin like totally said something that is like resonates with me about like intimacy. You can have like an intimate relationship with someone and still feel that they won't fully know you, and that's like an alienating feeling. And there's like no way to get around that. That tension is always there. And for a brief time, like on my like website, it said like Mandy's interested in exploring the relationship between intimacy and alienation. So that's like in everything that I do, of just like there are just so many sides of a person and you can never completely know someone. And so this film is about that as well, and that we as an audience see so many sides of Vanessa, but every one of the characters only sees one side of her, basically. And so like that's like the alienation she feels, and that like her cousin kind of sees like a couple sides of her, but still there's that moment where they go from, you know, in the city to the wake where her cousin falls asleep, and she's like, and they're going over the bridge in the dollar van, and she's like alone for the first time in the film. And that like moment is meant to like signify a little bit like how like there are just like some moments where like no one will ever truly understand like why you're really sad in this moment, because they just can't know every side of you. But yeah, so, so you're totally right. It's also about loneliness.
And really quick, before you get into the next part, I just want to say that it's interesting to hear y'all talk about this, because the very specific moments in life that you're touching on, someone who is middle-aged and then someone who's a teenager. These are, usually when we see loneliness depicted in films, it's characters in their 20s, 30s, in the time in their life where they're expected to be dating and meeting people. And so, it makes plenty of sense at that point in time to be or at any point to be reckoning with loneliness, but there's something really special about exploring it in the youth and in later years in life when you feel like you sort of have like this ticking clock. So another interesting similarity that the two have.
Yeah, it's like the outside edges of the prime dating years, or what we think of as prime dating years, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, both have an anxiety to them or like a
Mhm.
pressure.
For sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, my character is kind of like just beginning to enter that world, and your character is as well, but on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll go back to that question for you about inspiration for, cousins in particular and why that relationship.
Yeah. So I actually did have like a million cousins. It wasn't just three of us. Like, just have a huge family. Like, my mom has like 11 siblings, and my dad has like 7 or something. So I have like cousins on cousins on cousins, and like a ton of them are in the United States. And all throughout my childhood, we're immigrating to the United States. So I would have like, yeah, like every couple years, I get like some new cousins, best friends. And so, like, a big part of my like my fondest memories in childhood was like going to my auntie Gwendolyn's house in Jamaica, Queens, and like making up dances to songs with my cousins there. And then I would spend summers at my auntie Carol's house in Connecticut. And I like remember like all of that like very fondly as well. So I remember quite, yeah, that's like why I wanted to focus on cousins, because I think I have brothers, I have like siblings, and I'm the only girl. And
Mm,
so like my cousins, my girl cousins were like my first best friends for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think um, my family, the way that it works, I still have a bunch of younger cousins who, of course, that's a much different thing. I function to them more as like an aunt, and I definitely had that in my life as well. But I think sometimes it can be tempting to live vicariously through them and their experiences and watching them bond with one another. So yeah, this film was just a really sweet reminder of what that, used to look like at some point. Um, and then, y'all have both spoken a bit on the setting and the community that your films take place in, but I'd love to hear you speak more to how place informs your story, how, the larger community that these families are coming from and those traditions, uh, how they put, I don't want to say burdens, but how they put certain expectations on these characters to be to other people. I think yours, Martin, is maybe a little bit more obvious in just the expectations of the protagonist meeting a wife and moving out of the house. Did you want to start?
Yeah. I guess, yeah, in Filipino culture, again, in many other cultures too, you're supposed to reach a certain age and get married and move out and have kids. And even growing up as a teenager, I just remember you get to a family party and everyone is like, do you have a girlfriend? And as a young, shy kid, that was like the worst question you could ask me, because the answer was always no. And so, um, and that happens in the movie too, where this guy is like almost 50 and he's still sort of getting those questions, or are you going to have kids? And um, yeah, I guess that's sort of what I was thinking. And then, in contrast, he has this brother who's like married to this white Canadian woman, and he's sort of the pride of the family just because he has kids. And I know that's a common thing in some families. It's like you can have the one son who's not married but has this amazing job, son or daughter, and then the other person who just has a family, and it's like, just because you gave me grandkids, you're the best, you're like the favorite kid. And so that's sort of like how I built the characters and the dynamic of the family.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And then we see glimpses of the family and cousins at the funeral. I have a question. Was the funeral, was it a real funeral? Was it for the, it felt very real. It felt like
Mm.
almost a hybrid in some places
For
No,
oh
for,
no,
for cousins. Because that's another thing. Yeah, there are funerals in both of your films.
oh.
oh yeah, yeah. So,
No,
but
it
you're
was
asking about my film or Mandy's?
About Mandy's, but I'd love to
Okay.
hear both of y'all speak to that moment.
so it was not, no, it was not a real wake scene or funeral scene, but we worked really hard to find a church basement location that would look like it was real. So that's, I think that like is a lot of it. And we shot it in a way that's like, the lighting is a little bit to confuse you a little bit. And also all of the extras are my family. So they are non-actors, and my aunt made all of the food and all of that stuff.
Oh,
So
I think that's what it was. That's really beautiful. Just the singing and all those elements just felt very familiar, and, not so movie-like in a way that I appreciate it.
yeah, you get your family in a room and they're gonna make it look like a documentary.
They will do what they do. And Martin, you were going to talk about your the funeral scene as well. And yeah, actually, yeah, I would love for you to go in on just, what that moment meant to the story.
Um, yeah, it's actually same thing, that it was like my family and the producer's family that were our background. Um, I I have like a lot of memories being young in funerals, and the first time I ever went to one was really a profound moment for me. Like I kind of had this realization then that like we're all gonna die. And I don't know, I was probably like 7 or 8 or something. And I remember, you go up and then everyone can see the body. It was like an open casket. And I felt compelled to touch the person. And I remember touching their hand and feeling it so cold. And I don't know if I always had this in me and I just needed that experience to bring it out of me, or I don't know if it was some kind of child trauma thing where I was like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. Um, but then also there's something in the prayer that you see in the movie, this novena prayer that all Filipinos do. I think it's really big in like Latin American culture too. And I just find it really, it's like hypnotic. And I'm not a religious person, but sometimes, religious hymn and song
Yeah.
is still maybe, I grew up going to church, and, I could walk by a church and hear it. And it just sort of like overwhelms me, like these feelings of calmness. And um, I wanted to include that prayer, the rhythm of how they what do they call it? Like an answer repeat sort of prayer.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Mm.
Outside of personal connections and experiences and memory, were there other influences, say from films or books or anything that helped you build the relationships in your films? Like, did you look to other things as source material?
I did. There's a photographer named Roy DeCarava who like photographs like Black life in Harlem mainly, or did when he was alive. And I saw an exhibition of his work, and some of the shot choices were influenced by his work. But in terms of like the actual relationships in the film, there's like this film called We Are the Best by Lucas Moodysson, which is like he's like a Swedish director. It's about two 13-year-olds in like rural Sweden who like start a punk band. And it's just like the sweetest, coolest relationship ever. And it reminded me of myself as a kid, even though it's like culturally so different. And that was a huge influence. And then also the film Babylon by Franco Russo, which is like 1980s London, about like Jamaican, British, like they're a little bit older, like early 20s guys who just want to like make music and vibe, but like the UK government is like ruining their lives. But it's just like a really
Yeah,
great film about like the Caribbean diaspora. So that one was a huge influence as well.
that's so cool. Thank you. And for you, Martin?
There weren't a ton for me. Like, I know I was thinking about a lot of different movies, but I can't say there were any I really pinpointed that I was gonna like really sort of pay attention to and use to inform this
Yeah.
film. I think I was kind of worried about going too far in one direction, and I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to just kind of absorb everything that I had seen over so many years,
Mm.
and just kind of see what comes out. The one film I did reference though that was more for the father in the movie was Amor by Michael Haneke, because we had this very old man who was supposed to decline into death, and I just thought that was a movie that did that really, really well.
That's incredible. Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. And then, last question before we close things up. I feel like a lessons learned is always really helpful for filmmakers to hear about from other filmmakers. But, what was one of the biggest lessons that you learned about creating intimacy and trust on set between your characters, or even, with your crew, because this is such a collaborative process? What is there something that, working on these projects has revealed to you as a director or taught you as a director?
I think I can go first. I mean, I think it's just a matter of being transparent and communicating very early on, the expectations. Um, if this stuff's in the script, I mean, it should be in the script, and then maybe talking through what, how far they're supposed to go in scenes. And I think as long as they know that, and they also know that they can say no,
Mm,
I think really helps. And I think just knowing that they can say no will make them more willing to take the steps to see if they're comfortable.
yeah.
Because I mean, we hear now about a lot of stories where actors feel like they have to do things or else they're going to lose the job, or no one's going to want to work with them, or they're going to like, ruin the film because they wouldn't go, so far. But yeah, for us, it was just about like always communicating and making sure they understand that they can back out, or we're going to let them lead the way in how they want to do the scene.
Yeah, creating agency. That's
Mhm.
that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great advice. I'm going to take it going into future stuff. Thank you for that. For me, I think um, just having a really good production team, like for like first AD and second AD, who are just like empathetic and
Mm,
like just feel like approachable, was really important with working with teenagers. I think I mean, I've been on some sets where the AD is just like all business and like really frightening, and it just like ruins the vibe completely. And you can't like, the actors can't get into like their zone, and like everyone's like on edge, and that's just like the worst feeling. So for me, I think yeah, having a really empathetic, warm person run your set is important.
also huge. Absolutely. I've been in both atmospheres.
Yeah, it's
Well,
like
And
when you're in like the bad one, you're like, it doesn't have to be like
it doesn't.
yeah,
It's in fact, it's usually not. It's better when it's not like this. Like the actual product is better and work effort.
yeah. And just to quickly add something to what Mandy was saying about good crew, and making the crew understand and be comfortable and all that, is I have a problem with like this closed set idea when everyone's like closed set, but then there's still like 10 people. They're like only the essential people, but then there's still like 10 people there staring at the actors. And I'm like, this is not, we can pare down more than this.
Yeah, especially depending on the scene. It's
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank y'all so much for your words of wisdom and for being here today. Before we close out, where can people follow your work and reach out if they want to keep the conversation going with you?
For me, I've got clips of my work on Vimeo. There'll be a website set up someday, but for now it's Vimeo. There's also an email address there.
Sweet. And man,
I've got a website, which is just mandymarcus.com. And then my Instagram is probably the best place, which is not my name. It's Lil_stressful. I guess I can put that somewhere. I was like, should I have a more professional Instagram? It's too much work.
It's
So that's on my website too. And I post all of like what I'm doing on Instagram.
Great. Thank you all so much. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. I hope you, again, if you haven't seen these films, please go watch them. They're incredible. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks for tuning in.